ago. So we are delighted to have you with us this morning. And to launch this event, it's my pleasure to now give the floor to the Director for Europe of the United Nations Environment Programme, who joined us 1 month ago. And so he's still very new to Geneva and delighted to be here with you. Arnold, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Diana. Just gonna flip this around. There we go. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are drowning in plastic. The way societies produce, use, and dispose of plastic is polluting our ecosystems, creating risks for human health, and destabilizing our climate. And unfortunately, it is the poorest nations and communities that suffer the most, as is the case with all aspects of the triple planetary crises, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution. The science tells us that the current linear plastics economy, where we take from nature, make, produce, and waste, only to take more, make more, waste more, is not working. It racks up economic costs in the billions of dollars per year, destroying infrastructure, impacting on energy consumption and tourism, clogging our drains, flooding our cities, and risking our health by exposure to hazardous chemicals. Turning off the tap on plastic pollution, a recent report launched by UNEP also shows that by now we are producing over 400 million tons of plastic every year. Of that, less than 20% is recycled, 1/3 ends up in landfills, and the rest, over half, ends up right back in our oceans and in our environment with long-term effects. There is hope, though, not least in the global deal to end plastics pollution, which we are due to land by the end of 2024. Progress made at the second session of the International Negotiating Committee for a Plastics Agreement, which concluded just last week, and the mandate to prepare a zero draft of the international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution is encouraging. What we need, ladies and gentlemen, is a full life cycle approach, to plastics, from design to production to disposal, and a shift to a circular economic model, as well as safe disposal of products that are not intended to be circular, as well as effective dealing with the pollution legacy. Going circular is, of course, not easy, and it will need the support and involvement of everybody involved, from producers to consumers to governments and beyond, in finding solutions and innovation for every step along the way, and a just transition to a new plastics economy where plastics can continue to be of huge benefit to humanity by keeping it circular and out of the natural world. It is against this background that I would like to welcome you to this event celebrating World Environment Day here at the International Environment House in Geneva, around the theme of solutions to plastic pollution. It is the 50th anniversary of World Environment Day, and if you allow me to say, my first as Regional Director of Europe's office here in Geneva. We are delighted that we have leading diplomats and international experts taking the floor at this event who will highlight how International Geneva and the multilateral diplomacy system is engaged in finding the solutions to beat plastic pollution. I want to warmly thank all of them for making time out of their busy schedule and joining us here today. Many of them were in Paris last week for INC2, including, of course, representatives from the French government. We have with us the Deputy Permanent Representative, Madame Lachaussee. France, of course, hosted, together with our friends in UNESCO, the second session of the INC. And these experts and diplomats will reflect on the INC, but also on other processes and initiatives intended to help in dealing with this crisis, including work under the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, the Human Rights Council, or the World Trade Organization, and importantly also, of course, civil society. World Environment Day was created to shine a light on the environment and as an occasion to inform, share, and mobilize transformative action from every corner of the world. I would be remiss if I did not mention in this context the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, organized by the Geneva Environment Network in collaboration with the BRS Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, IUCN, the governments of Norway, Switzerland, and the Forum on Trade, Environment, and the SDGs, or TESS. Since their kickoff, so to speak, in October 2020, these dialogues have kept the international community in Geneva and beyond engaged on this topic, making links with various international processes, including the ones I have mentioned. Our event today is also organized in the framework of these dialogues. Of course, you know, ladies and gentlemen, that World Environment Day 2023 is hosted by Côte d'Ivoire with the support of the government of the Netherlands. Both of these countries are at the forefront of efforts to beat plastic pollution. Côte d'Ivoire was one of the first countries to ban plastic bags already back in 2014 and is driving innovation to beat plastic pollution. And the Netherlands, of course, is a member of the High Ambition Coalition, asking for an ambitious, legally binding instrument to beat plastic pollution. So it is a real pleasure for me to welcome to this event His Excellency Ambassador Alou Lambert Yao, the Deputy Permanent Representative and Chargé d'Affaires of Côte d'Ivoire, to this event. And I would like to invite him to give his opening remarks. His Excellency will address us in French. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, nous sommes ravis de vous accueillir et remercions la Côte d'Ivoire pour le soutien et bien sûr pour avoir accueilli la Journée mondiale de l'environnement 2023. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Malheureusement, je fais ma déclaration en français. Ceux qui ne comprennent pas le français, je m'excuse. Monsieur le directeur du programme des Nations Unies pour l'environnement, mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, mesdames et messieurs les directeurs de programme, distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, la Côte d'Ivoire s'honore d'être présente à ce dialogue de haut niveau sur l'environnement qui se tient ce jour à Genève. Aussi, je voudrais au nom du gouvernement ivoirien adresser mes remerciements aux partenaires internationaux en charge de la problématique des questions environnementales pour l'occasion qu'ils nous offrent de célébrer avec le reste du monde la Journée mondiale de l'environnement. Le thème choisi pour célébrer le 50e anniversaire de cette journée intitulé « Solutions à la pollution plastique ». Ce thème majeur vise à sensibiliser l'ensemble des populations sur les solutions actuelles de lutte contre la pollution plastique pour la protection de l'environnement et le bien-être des générations présentes et futures. Mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais encore une fois de plus remercier la communauté internationale, particulièrement le Fonds des Nations Unies pour l'environnement, pour le choix porté sur la Côte d'Ivoire et les Pays-Bas, deux pays leaders qui sont à la pointe de la lutte contre la pollution plastique pour abriter les festivités de cette journée. Ce choix est un signal fort donné à l'ensemble des pays qui ploient sous le poids des déchets plastiques en vue de les encourager à une véritable implication dans cette lutte. Par ailleurs, je voudrais souligner à l'attention de cette augure assemblée que la Côte d'Ivoire est résolument engagée dans la lutte contre la pollution plastique au niveau national et international. Elle est partie à plusieurs conventions et traités internationaux sur l'environnement. Au niveau des grandes instances internationales, elle a fait entendre sa voix sur les questions de protection environnementale. D'ailleurs, elle est porteuse de la résolution sur les droits de l'homme, la gestion et l'élimination écologiquement rationnelle des produits et des déchets dangereux au Conseil des droits de l'homme. Mesdames et messieurs, au niveau local, la Côte d'Ivoire a interdit l'utilisation des sacs plastiques depuis 2014, soutenant ainsi le passage à des emballages réutilisables. Dans cette dynamique, la Côte d'Ivoire entend prendre part active à l'occasion de cette journée par des actions de mobilisation et de sensibilisation sur les solutions à la pollution plastique dans le pays. Ces actions se déclinent comme suit. Opération symbolique de nettoyage de la plage du Grand Bassam. Table ronde stratégique avec les partenaires africains sur les avantages d'une économie circulaire pour les plastiques en Afrique. Séance de sensibilisation dans les établissements scolaires, universitaires et dans les marchés. Mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais rappeler que face aux défis environnementaux, fort heureusement, nous disposons de la science et des solutions. Cependant, il faut une volonté politique forte des gouvernants, des entreprises et des autres parties prenantes pour intensifier et accélérer les actions de lutte afin de résoudre cette crise. Dans cette perspective, la Côte d'Ivoire appelle à un engagement politique fort des États pour la mise en œuvre effective des accords multilatéraux signés dans le cadre de la protection de l'environnement et pour l'application des solutions existantes. La planète est notre unique demeure. Nous devons absolument la préserver, la protéger pour nous et pour les générations futures. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur Ambassador. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to watch two video addresses on the occasion of World Environment Day 2023. The first one is from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and the second one from the UNEP Executive Director Inga Andersen. I would ask the team to play the messages.
This World Environment Day is a call to beat plastic. Every year, over 400 million tons of plastic is produced, 1/3 of which is used just twice. Every day, the equivalent of over 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic is dumped into our oceans, rivers, and lakes. Consequences are catastrophic. Microplastics find their way into the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. Plastic is made from fossil fuels. The more plastic we produce, the more fossil fuel we burn, and the worse we make the climate crisis. We have solutions. Last year, the global we produce, the more fossil fuel we burn, and the worse we make the climate crisis. But we have solutions. Last year, the global community began negotiating a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution. This is a promising first step, but we need all hands on deck.
We want Global Plastics Treaty!
A new report by the UN Environment Programme shows that we can reduce plastic pollution by 80% by 2040 if we act now to reuse, recycle, reorient and diversify away from plastics. We must work as one, governments, companies and consumers alike, to break our addiction to plastics, champion zero waste and build a truly circular economy. Together, let us share a cleaner, healthier and more sustainable future for all.
On this World Environment Day, we're calling on everyone to help beat plastic pollution. Why, you might ask? Well, because plastic pollution is choking our ecosystems, warming our climate. On this World Environment Day, we're calling on everyone to help beat plastic pollution. Why, you might ask? Well, because plastic pollution is choking our ecosystems, warming our climate, and very likely damaging our health. Recycling is not the sole solution, nor the magic bullet. Our system simply can't cope. Change has to happen across the whole life cycle of plastics. We must refuse unnecessary single-use items. We must redesign products and packaging to use less plastic. We must reuse, recycle, and reorient and diversify our systems. This is how we keep plastic out of the ecosystems and in the economy. Everyone must play their part. Governments can deliver a strong outcome on the deal to end plastic pollution, which is currently under negotiation. And businesses can adopt a life cycle approach. The financial sector can put its capital right behind this very transformation that we need to see. And we, citizens, we can use our voices, our votes, and our wallets to drive change. My thanks to Côte d'Ivoire for showing their commitment to beating plastic pollution by hosting this, the 2023 World Environment Day. Now I ask that you join this
Thank you very much.
and help
Now,
us
ladies and gentlemen, we move into
once and for all.
the panel discussion on today's topic around multilateral solution to beat plastic pollution. And I'm very happy that Caroline Deer Burback, of course, the director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, also known here in Geneva as Tess, has agreed to moderate this panel. Tess and Caroline have, of course, been heavily involved in the dialogues here in Geneva around this topic. So Caroline, let me hand it over to you to moderate this panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arnold, for the introduction. And thank you all so much for being here today. It's really wonderful to see so many colleagues that I know and respect who work on different dimensions of the plastic pollution crisis, and many of whom were in Paris with us last week. So it's also great to regroup a little bit after that very intense but ultimately successful week last week. So today's event was conceived not as the usual roundtable of stakeholders that the Geneva Environment Network organizes, but rather as a celebration of the work that all of us here in Geneva do together to find multilateral solutions to plastic pollution. You've noticed that we have many speakers, and I will try and get through them all efficiently. But the reason we have so many, well, we have so many because we have so many actors in Geneva who have a piece of the puzzle in tackling plastic pollution. And there are indeed many more that could have been on this panel today. So this is sort of a sample of the wider community of actors in international Geneva who are relevant. I had the privilege last year of being in a meeting with the UN Secretary General where he mentioned the importance of having a system-wide approach across the UN system and with the wider family of international organizations to plastic pollution. And he highlighted the importance of engaging a diversity of stakeholders in that effort. And I think this is really important to underline today because as the Secretary General has underlined this morning, we'll need a systems change approach across the life cycle of plastics in order to end plastic pollution. We will need a fundamental shift in how much and how we produce, consume and dispose of plastics. And doing that, achieving that kind of transformation and a just transition will require insights from across the international system. So that's why it's so fantastic, I think, that our colleagues have organized this sort of multilateral solutions event today. So as I mentioned before, many of our colleagues were there in Paris last week and would have a lot to share on the moments that we all experienced there and the outcomes. But we're really delighted this morning to have with us the Deputy Permanent Representative of France, Emmanuel Lachaussee, who's joined us to share some of the outcomes from last week's negotiations. May I invite you, please?
Madame la modératrice, Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif, Mesdames, Messieurs les directeurs, Mesdames, Messieurs. Je m'exprimerai partiellement en français pour honorer notre hôte de la Côte d'Ivoire et la francophonie et partiellement en anglais. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de remercier la Côte d'Ivoire d'accueillir cette 50e journée mondiale de l'environnement et de la relayer ici avec le réseau de Genève pour l'environnement. Le thème de cette année, solution à la pollution plastique, est particulièrement important, car cette pollution est emblématique de notre société et de notre mode de vie, de consommation, de notre empreinte sur la planète. Le plastique pollue en premier lieu les océans, les littoraux, les rivières, les sols. La faune et la flore s'en trouvent asphyxiées. À la surface de l'océan Pacifique, on trouve plus de 80 000 tonnes de déchets enchevêtrés qui s'amassent dans une zone de convergence océanique pour former ce 7e continent dont la taille atteint 3 fois celle de la France sur plusieurs dizaines de mètres de profondeur. Pire, à cause des microplastiques désormais présents dans l'air et dans l'eau, aucun lieu sur la planète n'est épargné. Il y a du plastique au sommet du Mont Blanc. Chaque jour, en moyenne, plus de 40 kilos de microplastiques tombent sur Paris et 10 fois plus lorsqu'il pleut. Chaque semaine, chacun de nous ingère une quantité de plastique équivalente à une carte bancaire. Mais nous ne devons pas nous arrêter à ce constat alarmant. Nous devons agir. L'exemple de la Côte d'Ivoire qui interdit les sacs plastiques depuis 2014 doit nous inspirer. Nous saluons également son engagement en faveur des startups traitant de la pollution plastique et de l'économie circulaire. En France et en Europe, désormais, les plastiques à usage unique sont interdits, notamment la vaisselle jetable. Et nous avons renforcé la responsabilité étendue des producteurs. Ceux-ci doivent désormais s'organiser pour gérer la fin de vie de leurs produits. Nous saluons enfin l'engagement des pays du G7 en avril 2003 à réduire à zéro toute pollution plastique supplémentaire d'ici à 2040. Already in March 2022, the international community got mobilized with the goal of writing an international treaty to stop plastic pollution. France was proud to host 175 countries last week for the second negotiating committee of this future treaty. I would like to share with you some of the main results. Despite a few procedural debates at the beginning, the in-depth discussion were fruitful at the end. Two contact groups were set up and began their work. The first group was dedicated to the treaty's objectives. With regard to reducing the production and use of plastic, it remains to be decided whether binding international objectives will be defined, as the majority of countries would like, or whether each country will define its own national objectives. A ban on the intentional production of microplastics was encouraged, as was a ban on the plastics that are most problematic for health and the environment. The second group focused on resources. Developing countries called for industrial countries to finance the future treaty. Some favored the creation of a new dedicated fund, while others preferred to call on the Global Environment Facility. Finally, on June 2nd, it was decided that the first version of the treaty would be drafted for consideration at the next negotiating committee, INC 3, in November 2023 in Nairobi. This was one of France's objectives, and we remain determined to ensure that a clear target is set and that the treaty can be drafted in 2024 as planned. In the words of Christophe Béchu, the French Minister of the Environment, and I quote, "Discussions must continue non-stop until the November meeting in Kenya so that we can maintain this pressure in the negotiations, enabling us to meet this 2024 target." Et pour réaliser cela, tous les acteurs de la société doivent être mobilisés. L'événement d'aujourd'hui y participe et je vous en remercie.
If I may just take the privilege of the moderator also to invite everyone to also applaud France for the role that they played last week in ensuring that we had not only a great facility for the INC and space to hold the meetings, but really they did a great job in ensuring that we got to a successful conclusion. So I think we all can thank them. So moving on now to our first of our, the next of our roundtable stakeholder interventions, we're going to look at the effort to scale up work on the intersection of plastics and health. And in January this year, I had the pleasure of moderating the opening panel of Geneva Day in Davos, where the head of the World Health Organization spoke. And he clearly told us that he didn't think plastics pollution and health, that connection, had been given the attention it needed at the international level. We've also just heard the UN Secretary General this morning highlight another set of connections that warrant more attention, and that is the link between plastics and the climate crisis. He mentioned plastics is made of fossil fuels. The more plastic we make, the more fossil fuel we burn, and the worse we make the climate crisis. And in light of those two interventions, I can think of no better next speaker than Maria Nera, who is the Director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Health at the World Health Organization, with just a huge portfolio on some of these critical issues. And it would be great to hear your views on the landmark achievement last week at the World Health Assembly. You could either speak from there or up here, as you prefer. Perfect. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you both. Let me switch to the Voilà, c'est la haute technologie. Donc, let me switch to English now. I wanted to say that on one of your interventions, the permanent representative of La France, you started by saying, or you maybe, the moderator, you said that plastic has been found in the mountains. Let me tell you that there is worse than that. Is when you found it on your bloodstream or any organ in your body. That's really very an issue of concern. Last week, we have the World Health Assembly, and one of the resolutions presented on a record time and on an incredibly visionary and impactful way was this resolution on plastic treaty, on chemicals and waste and health, but focusing very much on this plastic treaty. I have to, of course, recognize the leadership of Peru, who has been pushing for having a resolution on an incredibly short time. So thank you for that. Of course, Switzerland and others, Mexico and many other parties, many other countries have been participating. Discussing about what is the impact of plastic pollution and health, it's true that we still need to look for a lot of evidence showing those links. But part of this equation is how you can put it the other way around. Can somebody show me the evidence that it's good to have plastic on your body? Do we have any evidence proving that? So we need to remove plastics whenever it's possible, and we have a lot of options of that. WHO will be very much engaged on putting in place, on implementing this resolution. The leadership has been extraordinary. Now the response has to be extraordinary as well. So I request that many of you who are normally participating on environmental negotiations, please make sure that you talk to your ministers of health when they come to health negotiations as well. And because we need to be very much in line on this very strong and strategic issue. Second, of course, WHO is arguing for stopping the use of fossil fuels for different reasons, for climate change reasons, for pollution of the air we breathe reasons, and now as well to stop this use for plastic and then the plastic consumption and use. So we have many joint efforts here. At COP28 this year, and I will stop here, for the first time ever, at the climate change negotiations, we will have a health day. This is totally unprecedented. And one of the things we want to take is how much pollution, where this pollution comes from, how much is affecting our health. And if we want to put it in positive, what are the extraordinary health outcomes we can obtain if we stop the combustion of fossil fuels, if we take very serious measures to mitigate climate change, and of course, if we stop any type of pollution, including very much the plastic or the electronic pollution that we are seeing. So thank you very much all, and I hope this answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you also on behalf of all of us for your work to connect the dots between these intersecting issues, and also wanted to also thank Peru again for their leadership on making the connection at the governmental level and bringing that resolution to the World Health Organization. So now, on the theme of connecting the dots, I'm delighted to introduce Maria Daniela Garcia, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Ecuador to the World Trade Organization. She is also Ecuador's lead negotiator in the INC process. And I think what we find in Ecuador is sort of the embodiment of an effort to connect the dots here in Geneva, for instance, between the environment community of policymakers and the trade community of policymakers. So Ecuador is a member of the High Ambition Coalition, which is calling for legally binding treaty. And she is also Ecuador is also one of the coordinators of the dialogue on plastics pollution at the WTO. So over to you, Daniela.
Thank you very much. It's working. Thank you very much, Caroline. So glad to see you all here, and very honored to share this panel with such great colleagues and many leaders in the room in terms of ambition and working towards the same goal of ending plastic pollution. So very happy to be here. Also, I have some of my colleagues, co-coordinators of the Dialogue of Plastic Pollution here, Saida and Xiao Hui. We co-coordinate the dialogue together with Australia, Barbados, China, Fiji, and Morocco. We are 6 co-coordinators. At the very beginning, we thought it was going to be difficult, but it's actually been great to be diverse with bringing every perspective to the table. The dialogue started in 2019 and started as an effort from developing countries with an objective, and it started with an objective to address the problem developing countries were facing in terms of waste, importing waste. So the dialogue has 3 main areas of work. One, it's on cross-cutting issues, very much looking towards how to bring coherence and how to engage with other efforts and other processes. During our ministerial meeting in 2021 and in our ministerial statement, we were the first, before the UNEA resolution was adopted, we already recognized the UNEA resolution that was led by Peru and Rwanda. And when I say there is a lot of leadership in the room, I think all of this shows the great collaborative effort that brings everybody together to the same table with the same will and bringing all efforts and hands on deck, how it was the quote that the Secretary General used. And you, Caroline, mentioned an effort across the UN system, but also with all the family in terms of international organizations and bringing all the expertise to the table. So we also have worked very much since the beginning with the BRS Secretariat, so many thanks. We have, and great to be here next to you, Rolf. I feel very honored to be next to you, and we work from the very beginning, understanding we were not starting from zero. We were starting from a base of a lot of efforts. We recently, as for many of you that know the WTO, there's across the UN system, there is always a participation of stakeholders. In the WTO, this is not usual, but the dialogue has more than 30 stakeholders at the moment. We just welcome the WTO, so happy to work also with the WTO team. And of course, we work with IUCN. We look forward to work also with the ILO, knowing that this year is the year of the just transition. So going to specifics, in terms of trade solutions, how trade can contribute to the global response to plastic pollution. And when we talk about trade, we talk about many tools that we have in terms of trade. Trade to incentivize, trade to disincentivize, trade to promote, trade to regulate. So one of the, going from the first area, when I was talking about cross-cutting issues that also include transparency, 4% of the trade in the world is trade in plastics. And that doesn't take into consideration hidden plastics or embedded plastics, including packaging, because there is a lack of identification in terms of when we trade these goods, those are not identified through our customs system. So another part, and I thank very much Caroline here, because there was a great work done by TESS, but also UNTAD in terms of understanding the plastic economy and understanding the trade flows in terms of this economy. So we're working a lot on transparency, knowing that the WTO is the only organization that has information about trade-related policies. And when we talk about bans, import bans, export bans, regulations in terms of microplastics, packaging, we're talking about trade-related policies. Even we talk about, even when we talk about standards to produce a good, when we talk about services as well, for example, waste management, safe waste management, but also when we talk about single-use plastics regulations. So understanding first data, contributing from that front, and also working with the WHO in a partnership to, we just presented a letter to start a process of better identifying plastics and plastics waste. So going, another area that's very important cross-cutting issues, and I will be brief because I know we don't have much time. We have undertaken another work in addressing trade-related capacity building and technical assistance. So we have run a survey understanding what's that trade-related technical assistance and capacity assistance needs and priority from developing countries. So starting to understand from the local context and the domestic context to what is needed in this area, from technology needs to better identified, but also capacity building in terms of better policy design and so on. And the two other areas are reduce enhanced dialogue that started in 2020 on how to reduce harmful and unnecessary plastics. So yes, the WTO is talking about reducing pollution, not ending pollution by reducing production. So in this stream, we're talking about goods and how trade tools can better help in terms of eliminating or reducing these unnecessary and harmful goods. We have also another work in terms of identifying those trade tools that can better serve to promote trade in goods and services, including access, development, and uptake of technologies for environmentally sound and safe waste management, and an appropriate cleanup responding to local development circumstances and needs, and of course, based on best available science. So this has started. This work has started in understanding first the panorama and understanding how trade tools can better contribute also to other processes, and from the understanding that there's nothing preventing in the trade, in the multilateral trade system and rules to have ambitious outcomes in terms of environmental processes. There is another area of work that many members have addressed, and that's the area of subsidies. The WTO is an organization that very much, we have an agreement on subsidies, and certainly there is another initiative that is led by, very much well led by New Zealand in terms of fossil fuels, and many members from that initiative have addressed how trade can also better, how trade can enhance the efforts in terms of data, transparency, but also going beyond in areas of how to reduce these financial incentives that are directed to goods that are harmful and unnecessary or primary plastics. I will stop there by thanking also, and mainly UNCTAD has done an amazing job in terms from the Bridgetown Covenant in terms of oceans and bringing the knowledge in terms of safe, sustainable substitutes. We're working with FAO, WCO, TES, UNCTAD, IPEN just presented a great report, Mindero, and so on. So there is a huge work, and we are 76 members at the moment. Most of us developing countries. So this was one of the initiatives where we actually, that started as a development countries, with a development countries perspective, but also that was, I think, the only one in the WTO where developing countries were calling developed members to participate in. Now we have a diversity from every, with members from diverse regions and of course, diverse levels of development with a common goal. And I will stop there. And just saying that happy to see that last week in INC2, when we were talking about control measures, we were talking about the whole life cycle of plastics, but understanding, of course, how control measures will be effective if we tackle production, but also every part, I mean, production, use, put on the market, import, export, but also going to the end of the value chain when we want to have very effective measures in place. And thank you, Caroline. I love to talk about trade, but I know there's not enough time. So
Thank
happy
you,
again
Daniela.
to be with all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. So you made a really compelling case that trade issues are very relevant here. And I think for many environmental issues, we get to the trade issues right at the end. And so I think it's great here that we're trying to understand those early, and that there's an effort of such a diverse group at the WTO to try and look at how they can cooperate on these topics. No doubt there are many economic interests at stake, very important to consider and work out how we manage a kind of transition. But what I think is important there is that such a diverse group of countries are at the table trying to work out how they can cooperate on the trade dimensions of this. So on the issue of transition and transformation, I'm happy now to introduce Mustafa Kamal Guiye, who is the director of ILO's Priority Action Programme on Just Transitions towards Environmentally Sustainable Economies and Societies. I have to say, Kamal, that I know that the International Labour Conference is kicking off today, so we're especially grateful that you took the time to be with us this morning. Thank you.
So much, Caroline, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. So as the moderator has said, it is a very important day for us in the world of work, not only because it's a World Environment Day, but it is also the start of the 111th International Labour Conference. And at this conference, the tripartite constituents of the ILO will engage in a general discussion on the subject of a just transition, including the consideration of industrial policies and technology towards environmental sustainability. So it's therefore a very critical moment and timely that our constituents are also having a similar discussion. Now, that discussion at the ILO, starting at 3 p.m. itself, will be a continuation of the conversation here, because the shift to environmental sustainability is entire. It is not just about energy, it's about plastics. And for us in the world of work, there are three important messages that we would like to convey and which our constituents are bringing into this global effort. One is that we must get the narrative right. There are some who think still that there is a choice to be made between a strong economic growth that delivers jobs, decent work, and protecting the environment. So that narrative has to be made clear that it is not environmental change and ambitious responses to environmental change that is a job killer. It's the opposite. We know that from the energy sector, the energy transition, and that is the case when it comes to plastic pollution as well. On the other hand, many studies by the ILO and others have shown the potential of generating millions of decent jobs in a circular economy. Our estimation is that a shift to a circular economy could generate 80 million jobs by 2030. But there is an element of policy which matters, and that is the policy coherence. Environmental policies must go hand in hand with economic and social policies. I think what we've just heard about trade is an element of it, health is an element of it, but labor policies as well. We estimate that 78 million people would need to be reskilled, upskilled in the shift to a circular economy, and plastics are going to be a critical element of that. The good news is that many people would be able to be retrained, reskilled, and find jobs in the same industries that they are in, and possibly in the same countries. So it's a matter of just making that effort. But that reskilling, making the workforce able to bring the transformations, brings a number of policy issues. There is a question of paying for reskilling, upskilling, because the policy process that we are in is a public policy. It is, in some ways, public interference in the functioning of markets, but for the goods, for public goods. So some say it is for governments to pay for all this reskilling, upskilling of workforce. Others say it is for companies to do that, to reskill, upskill their workers. And some are saying any of us wanting to look for employment pays for their own studies, university, so it's for individuals. So therefore, I'm putting this policy question of the cost. Who bears that cost? The second element is more of process. We know that the ongoing negotiation is a parties-driven process, but we also know that it is going to have significant impacts on enterprises. especially small and micro enterprises, but also those workers in the informal economy. Last Monday in Paris, we were there with IUC and colleagues, and we have seen the scale of engagement of workers in the informal economy. WeAgo and many other organizations are very keen, but they are coming in this discussion not as a force of resistance, but as agents of change. I think they just need the space to be part of it. And again, it brings us back to the positive narrative that I started with. There is a positive narrative, but it requires policy coherence. It requires engagement of all actors in the real economy, governments working with enterprises, small micro, those in the informal economy, and trade unions. So collectively, we have a strong leadership, not only in the environmental community, but in the world of work. And we very much look forward to see that this afternoon when the International Labour Conference will kick off.
Thank you very much, Mustafa Kamal, for your intervention. I'm going to quickly just turn to introduce Alfonso Gomez, who is the mayor of the city of Geneva. Bienvenue. Il va prendre la parole après à la clôture de l'événement. Merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous. So I'm going to turn back now to our next panelist. We have Rolf Payet, who is Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, which of course play a key role in the plastics agenda. I'm just going to ask all of our panelists from here forward, because we are running about 10 minutes late, to try and be brief, with the threat that I will ring my amazing Swiss mountain bell if you're longer than the allotted time. So thank you all. Please, Rolf, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I have a reputation for speaking a lot, so I'll try and be brief. I mean, from a reflection perspective, since today is the Environmental Day, I would say that the plastics issue has brought us a long way in working together. When I joined the Secretariat and starting to talk, even with colleagues in the WHO, they were telling me there's no evidence on plastics, we don't think. And I was talking to colleagues in trade. We were sitting in a corner of a room. They felt there were bigger trade issues to discuss, such as, export, import, and trade relations and all this. Today, on the 5th of June, 2023, we've heard from colleagues from WHO talking about landmark decisions on dealing with the issue of plastics because it has an impact on our health. Trade has important implications. What a wave of change. Even Mr. Mayor of Geneva, when we passed the landmark amendment to the plastics under the Basel Convention, I wrote to all the institutions in Geneva, and I wrote to the continent in Geneva. I said, guys, we live here, we are taking decisions, we need to leave the talk. And I said, let's leave the talk. Let's eliminate plastic, single-use plastic in Geneva. Let's eliminate single-use plastic in our conferences. I'm so happy today that even from UNOC, all the international organizations here have put in efforts. And I mean, we had challenges with procurement and with the companies working here. And even I've gone into some meetings where the procurement is saying, no, we have this, you need to have that. We said, no, we need to be the change. We need, and I keep on saying that, I said it last week in Paris, and I said it again this way. If we don't lead the change, nobody's going to lead it for us. So we need to lead the change in our policies, in our strategies, in our thinking, in everything that we do. Now, coming back to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, as you know, we had the triple COPs 2 weeks ago, and the work continued. And this is what is great with my parties. There were some parties saying, oh, we need to wait for the INC, and then other parties says, no way. This issue is pressing. This issue needs our attention now. So the majority of the parties decided to go forward and going on with the work. Whatever happens in the INC, I'm always asked the question, what's the relationship with the INC and the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions? I say they have great relationships, and we are on this journey together. One is on a highway, and the other one is trying to get on the highway. And I'm happy with the outcomes that we got in Paris. Now there's a mandate for us to start working on a zero draft. So we are entering this highway and moving towards dealing with plastics from a global perspective, but also thinking that at the national level, we need concrete action. And this came out last week in Paris. We need support for those countries. And no country can come up with a solution that will fit all. The problems are so specific to each country that we need to think about how we can really make it happen at the national level. And here I'm happy we have the youth as well. The intergenerational issue is something I'm very passionate about, because this is the problem, guys, we created. And ladies, we are the ones, this generation here. Some of you have got white hair like me, so we are in the same generation, okay? In the last 50 years, we are the ones who are responsible for this plastic problem. So let's not pass it on to those guys, you know, bright guys who's gonna be using ChatGPT in the next 10 years to find out the solution to the world's problems. That's a different topic, but let's not pass on this problem to them. And coming back to the convention adopted, after serious negotiations in the night, updated guidelines on plastics. This was very tough because the guidelines were developed like 15 years ago, and since there was no movement, nobody was seriously interested, the guidelines went to sleep. And suddenly, with so many people interested and the need for governments also to get advice on what are the best technologies, best approaches, parties put a lot of work. Intersessionally and at the COP, they adopted the guidelines. So I'm really, really happy that we now have a set of updated guidelines. And my feeling is we need to be updated more and more as the discussions go on, but I'm very happy with this outcome. Second outcome, which for me was very innovative, is the Stockholm Convention listed 2 chemicals, which are not really plastics, but they are additive to plastics. As you know, plastics are very, very special kinds of chemicals because they can be, you know, things can be added to them, they can be reinforced, things can, and that's why they are found in everything that we have today, from the kitchen to the bin. And those 2 chemicals, one was protecting the plastic from breaking down from action of the sun, because when you expose plastic to the sun, it will naturally break down with the solar rays. And this chemical was added to the plastics to stop it. And this was, of course, important applications in agriculture, in panels, in anything that's exposed to the sun, even in clothing. And the parties agreed to phase out this chemical. And this was proposed by Switzerland, so I'm very happy. Our host country is also driving this forward, and we got it listed. And industry now has a clear signal that we need to get this chemical out of the plastic thing. Now, you might think, it might not lead to the reduction of plastics. Yes, but it will lead to the removal of toxic additives in plastics. And that's something which is serious, because it tries to answer the question when it comes to recycling, when it comes to recovery of plastics, when it comes to those plastics turning into microplastics and leaching into the environment and being absorbed into our bodies. So these are very, very important decisions might be being taken by those conventions. They are, of course, in the complex area of industry and chemistry, but it has very, very deep repercussions on the products that we will see in the future. Now, they've set deadlines of 2040, 2043, but I think it's a great signal to industry to look for better and safer alternatives that can be used in some of these products. So I will stop here, but of course there's exciting work ongoing, and I'm really, really happy we have everybody here around the table, from ILO, from the NGOs, from the private sector here talking about this global problem. And I'm sure that with all these efforts put together, we will have a solution in 2040. So happy Environment Day to us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolf. And I think that we can all agree that Rolf exemplifies exactly the kind of enthusiasm and leadership we need in this space, because I think you've really played a key role in catalyzing and welcoming the engagement of other parts of the UN system and stakeholders in this space, which I think is something, the kind of leadership that we all need to see. So I thank you for that. And also for underlining on this panel the importance of science, which we'll come back to later on in the panel as well. And you also echoed Kamal's point about the importance of a positive narrative on what is a very, very complex issue in terms of the level of sort of policy connections and integration that are needed. Plastics itself is the plastics economy is complex, and our responses will involve a nuanced response as well. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to dive into the human rights approach to beat plastic pollution. As you know, Geneva is the capital of human rights, and members at the UN Human Rights Council have been discussing a range of human rights approaches to plastic pollution, to toxics, and also the right to science. So I'm delighted to have Peggy Hicks, who is the Director of Thematic Engagement, Special Procedures, and the Right to Development Division of the UN Human Rights Office.
Thanks so much. Hello? Yes? Okay, great. So glad to be here with all of you illustrious speakers and leaders in this important field. We've already heard so much about the disturbing impact of plastic pollution. And, I just want to emphasize, of course, that impact extends to so many of our basic human rights, the rights to health, food, water, and sanitation, and of course, fundamentally, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But for far too long, plastics has been seen as only a waste problem. Even now, when states have the opportunity to agree on a truly ambitious and transformative treaty to end plastic pollution, there are fears that a limited scope focusing on waste and a failure to fully address the needs to reduce production and consumption may limit the ambition there. It's time to realize that plastic pollution threatens our world, our lives, and our rights, and act accordingly. Addressing plastic pollution is not only a waste problem, but a human rights crisis. And by addressing it in that fashion, we have 4 distinct advantages. First, once we recognize that human rights are being violated, we move from a should framework to a must framework. States have legal obligations to protect the full range of rights affected by plastic pollution and to build their economies in ways that address unsustainable consumption patterns and to encourage consumer choices that are informed by human rights, including the right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment. Second, looking at human rights also focuses the spotlight on the inequalities that are built into this crisis. Like so many environmental concerns, plastic pollution is hurting those least able to push back the hardest. These groups and peoples in vulnerable situations include indigenous communities, coastal communities, people living in extreme poverty, communities near production facilities, workers at heightened risk of occupational exposure, people with certain medical conditions, and of course, children, women, minorities, and people of African descent are both most likely to be affected and often suffer the most severe consequences. These same communities, at the same time, lack the means of recourse to adequately access healthcare information and opportunities to protect themselves from exposure to the hazards and impacts of plastic cycle and access to remedy. Third, applying a human rights-based approach to addressing the plastic crisis can really help. Taking a human rights-based approach gives us a roadmap about how we can successfully move forward by focusing on key principles such as non-discrimination, transparency, accountability, precaution, prevention, and intergenerational equity. In practice, this means that people, particularly those most effective, have a right to participate in addressing the plastic crisis, and that when they do, we will find better solutions. It guarantees transparency and requires access to information as the foundations for that meaningful participation. It ensures access to justice in environmental matters as a means to ensure not only accountability of businesses and states, but also of remedies. The human rights-based approach puts people at the heart of decision-making, requiring laws, policies, and regulations to take account of the cross-cutting impact of plastics on health, human rights, and labor rights, and on the environment, and helps ensure inclusive and informed decision-making aligned with scientific evidence and the needs of people in vulnerable situations. We also put in place safeguards to ensure that proposed alternatives are not short-sighted and do not lead to further harm. In other words, it works against false solutions and greenwashing. Fourth, it emphasizes that all businesses, including those in the plastic sector, have a responsibility to protect human rights to respect human rights under the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. It emphasizes their need to do human rights due diligence and identify, prevent, and mitigate and account for how they address the negative human rights impacts stemming from their use of plastics. In closing, let me emphasize that human rights thinking needs to be applied not only to plastics problems, but also to proposed solutions. Alternatives to plastics need to be assessed regarding their implications for human rights, including the right to a healthy environment. We need, as has been said, a reality check about recycling, given where we currently stand. Existing recycling facilities and technologies fall far short of addressing current plastic waste streams, let alone projected increases. Other proposed solutions, such as incineration, plastic to fuel, and bioplastics, must be assessed regarding their implications for human rights and the environment. Fulfilling the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for all requires we make urgent changes to production, use, and disposal of plastics, as well as address and remediate the impacts of plastics on our physical environment. Plastic pollution is a human rights crisis, and human rights can help us solve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. So now I'm in the challenging position of I have 4 speakers to fit into less than 20 minutes. So I'm going to ask each of you to please be as concise as possible. So we want to save time. We have further speakers following that. But if we can just be as brief as possible while conveying your core messages, that would be great. So I'm going to turn firstly to Karine Sigwart, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. She's going to speak to us a little bit about their work on nature-based solutions to plastic pollution. Thank you, Karine.
Thank you so much. Thank you to be here. Thank you for inviting IUCN. Talking about nature-based solutions, it sounds really simple and so interesting for a World Environment Day. Nature-based solutions. Per definitionem, every solution should be in favor of the nature. So a definition of nature-based solution is important. In 2016, based on science, IUCN issued a first definition of what are nature-based solutions, which was taken over by UNEA also in this famous year of 2022. So today we have a definition of nature-based solutions that says we understand actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems. So we have some proven nature-based solution who has been applied and tested under the Climate Convention and also the Biodiversity Convention. The question for today is, what does this mean for plastic pollution? Does there nature-based solutions exist to address the objectives that we have under the treaty? We, from IUCN, see namely 2. One is the aspect of restore. The problem is huge. If you look at the small island developing states, or also in African countries where we have now a marine outlook, litter outlook, where can nature step in to clean up? So nature-based solution can take a certain place for the restoration of the situation we are facing now. Restoration means, for example, and I'm coming to be a little bit more concrete, with an example, reducing plastic pollution of ecosystems, such as mangroves, can support ecosystem recovery. But this means before supporting these mangroves on place, you have to clean up. You have to clean. There's a huge plastic leakage all around the world, and nature-based solution for restoring can only come in place when the situation is a little bit less. Secondly, a nature-based solution can also be an instrument to tackle plastic pollution with regarding alternatives and substitutes, and also with regard infrastructure and technologies in the waste treatment. One is the reduction of microplastics in water. The other is the reduction of plastics in agriculture. For example, the use of organic milk instead of plastics is a nature-based solution. But also the reduction of plastic material in packaging. For example, materials made of bamboo is a nature-based solution. But we have to be aware when we are talking about these nature-based solutions for substitutes and other materials for replacing it, it can also have some negative consequences on environment and climate change that must be taken in account with the whole life cycle assessment approach. So only under specific environmental circumstances we could use, for example, microorganisms consuming plastics. That was also mentioned by some proposals, and the scaling so far is not clear. When we look on the potential, and here I'm coming to my end, of nature-based solution to reduce plastic pollution, especially in agriculture, we need really more knowledge and science approach, and also an understanding is needed. We need more work that has to be done to tackle this plastic pollution. And, for example, nature-based solutions also in gray and green solutions could be having a closer look on it in wastewater treatment, for example. The objective or the challenge is clear. We cannot recycle us out of this mess, as Inge Anderson said. We need much more science cooperation on the issue what nature-based solution can do in the plastic pollution crisis. We need the trade cooperation with regarding materials that are alternatives or substitutes. But we need, at the end, a bold plastics treaty that is taking into account also the biodiversity and ecosystems aspects as a cross-border issue or a cross-cutting issue. Nature is circular, per se. Nature is circular. So with the plastics treaty, we have to go towards a circular economy that begins in nature and ends also in nature. And for that, nature-based solutions could be a way to get out of this.
Thank you very much, Karine. And you've also made a compelling case for the importance of science in the treaty. Indeed, last week there was a strong call from the scientific community on the need to have clear mechanisms for independent science to inform both the development and the implementation of the treaty. But I'm going to turn swiftly to our colleagues who are here, Ahmed Kaushik, who is the global focal point for the children and youth major group to UNAP. Our colleague Rolf has already done a great introduction to the importance of future generations in our consideration of how we act now. So I turn over to you, please, Zahir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. Actually, it's a great pleasure to bring the youth perspective here in this multilateral dialogue. And obviously, I will try to be very limited because I understand that we are running out of time. We understand that, obviously, happy World Environment Day that I want to greet to all. Young people actually bring a lot of change, to the kind of scenario of plastic pollution. They're actually trying with the limited resources, and the access to policy making that they have. There are a lot of solutions, and especially, today I'm here maybe just because that young people, they created this space for themselves with their infectious activism. They've created a momentum for the stakeholder engagement, especially the CSOs, worldwide, that we can see in the climate change space. Young people, we have a vibrant, participation of young people in climate negotiations these days. We also need that for other environmental negotiations. Young people in the global south, unfortunately, we can't learn a lot of things from our curricula because we read a lot, but we learn very little because current education system is actually failing to, teach the skills and the information that we need to be environment friendly people. And we normally in global south countries like Bangladesh, we learn from peer-to-peer learning, and especially from the informal interventions. Especially that was the case for me as well, because as a disaster management student, I literally didn't get to learn a lot of things that I was supposed to. I got to learn that with my own, effort. Young people actually is the most innovative stakeholder that we have so far, and they are coming up with a lot of new solutions and entrepreneurial actions. And this is a very good sign that young people are also, in many countries, they're, introducing the, indigenous practices that we have. They're redesigning the, the solutions, and they're bringing up the the indigenous practices that we had earlier, in pre-plastic era. Obviously, it's not like the plastic. We always had plastic. We had a lot of environmental solutions earlier, like in Bangladesh, we used to use a lot of, clay-made utensils and all. But currently, we have lost those, but young people and young entrepreneurs are bringing those to the market and making sure that our next generations, our current and next generations are getting introduced to those. We also, being more than the 50% of global population, we are a very large consumer group, and we can see the change, in the mindset of young people. They are now considering the environmental friendly lifestyle over the conventional lifestyle we have. But we really need more and more effort to, promote the environment friendly living in the urban spaces, especially. Now, I also want to shed some light. We know that what are the youth-led solutions could be, and young people in different spaces, they literally talked about these a lot, but maybe we can also shed some light on what other stakeholders we have here can do for young people to make sure that the youth can take and promote the solutions. Human rights is a very important issue. We have seen a lot of member states talking about human rights, especially I think that in the one of the human rights councils, we have seen 32 member states shedding light on how plastic is infringing our human rights. But unfortunately, we didn't hear much from our member states in INC2 about human rights. We have brought that issue in our closing statement, that the rights of nature, rights of our people should be brought in the negotiation. And let's not keep in human rights in just verbal interventions and written statements. Make sure that we are putting this in actions and policies as well. Engage, when you address human rights, you are actually addressing intergenerational equity, which is preserving the right of children and youth. And obviously, young people are not an alien species. We are human beings. And when you are the human rights, you are actually ensuring the right of young people. Engage young people in decision-making and policy-making, because we live on your success and failures. The policy you're making today, the multilateral environmental agreement you're negotiating today, obviously going to affect our life heavily. So if you fail to address, if you fail to engage us, if you fail to have our expectations and demands reflected in the policies, then you are actually going to fail. We're going to have another hollow treaty. Allocate resources. We don't have resources, young people. We don't have access to resources and decision making. Allocate resources for young people. We have seen a lot of even entities, member states, they're allocating resources for young people's participation in UNFCCC process. I hope that they will also allocate resources for young people to engage in other environmental fora. We know that young people can be the entrepreneurs and solutionists, but you have to improve the current entrepreneurship and business environment that we have, especially in the global south countries, where the environment is not friendly for young people to start new business. And yeah, obviously, when you are giving a lot of resources to young people, providing them opportunities to engage in different decision-making, but not developing their capacities, that's not going to be meaningful. So, putting them in a fora and, giving them a mic to speak doesn't make a lot of sense. You have to develop their capacities because you reached here after a lot of efforts. So you need to capacitate them as well. So I am now concluding my statement, asking a question, like young people are doing more than what they are supposed to do with limited and almost no resources and access to resources and decision making. We're showing that change is possible. But are you doing enough for young people to beat plastic pollution? Thank you.
Great, and thank you for that closing question to hear. So I have 3 more speakers before we move to the closing panel, and I have to make time for them as well. So I'm going to appeal to the remaining panelists to be as focused as possible. And first, I'm really delighted to introduce Dominic Woche, who is the Executive Vice President of Imperatives at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where he's going to talk to us some of the work they're doing on corporate accountability to end plastic pollution. And I would note here that many members of the World Business Council are also members of the Business Coalition for the Global Plastics Treaty as well. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And happy World Environment Day, everyone. It's good to see you all. Just first of all, a great appreciation to our colleagues from France for a fantastic INC2. I had the pleasure and privilege, together with our Peruvian colleague, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, and our colleague Anjali Anchara from the World Bank to moderate the multi-stakeholder dialogues on the early Saturday. And you devoted 6 hours with over 35 stakeholders from ministries, from civil society, from youth, from science, on all types of issues, including also business, to look into these issues. And it was a very, very worthwhile investment. And I think it produced a number of interesting comments and feedbacks, which have been echoed here. I won't go through them all, but a science-based evidence underpinning the whole negotiation, the need to draw upon really good case studies and actions. We've heard some already, but there are some excellent ideas that have come out and things that have really worked across many parties and which could be replicated and scaled up. A really important one was the whole economy systems change approach. We've heard here about trade. On trade, for example, the ability to think circular about things like the Basel Convention, so the transboundary movement of secondary materials to create a global market. We've got a linear set of protocols at the moment, and many other things besides. So it was a really, really good set of dialogues, and thank you for that. Indeed, many World Business Council for Sustainable Development members are part of the Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, which is calling for global binding rules. A level playing field can open up the marketplace for much more investment and R&D and delivery on what those outcomes of the treaty will be. So in some shape or form, there will be a cluster of common globally binding rules plus national action plans to implement them. And the engagement of the leading business voices as well as others to identify exactly how those rules will be in place will actually unlock a lot of investment. For example, extended producer responsibility, that came up a lot in the discussions. At the moment, there are over 60 or 70 different types of scheme for extended producer responsibility. If you have businesses who want to go down that path, that's an awful lot of bureaucracy to figure out in many, many different nations. So a common set of standards for something like that would be a real unlock. The human rights thing is a huge, important issue, and was extremely welcome to have that dimension into the conversation, particularly to have businesses signing up to a Declaration on Human Rights. One particular area which underpins all of this is corporate accountability. We can see it in the climate space, and we can see it here in plastic pollution. If and when this treaty arrives, businesses will need to set a target, will need to have a transition plan to implement that target, will need to account on an annual basis for that target, and will need to disclose somewhere on how they're doing. None of those pieces of the architecture really currently exist, unlike in the carbon space, where we do have things like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, we do have things like CDP. So one element that came through very strongly, both in those dialogues and in many of the discussions, and we even heard it here already, accountability and transparency, is the need to develop globally harmonized disclosure obligations and reporting standards so that hundreds, if not millions of businesses can frictionlessly use such a system. If you create that, great unlock. And then we can all see how everyone is doing against their various commitments. So building on the efforts such as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Global Commitment, WWF's Resource, Plastic, and CDP, these are the sorts of things that we're up to help support, buttress, and deliver with speed and scale the global plastic negotiation and treaty efforts of the INC. And we're all in to help create a very, very successful outcome, and delighted to be part of International Geneva in this situation to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominique. And certainly, I think we're all aware that solving the plastics crisis will involve business leadership, and it's great to see your efforts in taking that forward, and also learning from what's been happening in the climate space as well. So I'm going to turn finally in this part of the panel to David Azoulay, who is the director of the Geneva office and the Environmental Health Program at the Center for International Environmental Law. As you all know, civil society played the key role in mobilizing our society and governments to focus on the plastics crisis. And David has been someone who's been central to building that civil society voice and to trying to use that to hold governments to account. Over to you, David.
Merci beaucoup, Caroline. Je voudrais remercier le gouvernement de Côte d'Ivoire, Dankjewel en Nederland, et merci beaucoup à la ville de Genève pour nous accueillir ici. And of course, a big thank you to the Geneva Environment Network and all the partners from the Geneva Beat Dialogue Pollution, which I think have been playing quite an important role in creating this space and increasing the role that we can all play together in increasing the linkages. Those of you who know me know how difficult it will be for me to be short and effective. I can be quite garrulous and passionate about this particular issue of plastic, but the easy task that was given to me is that a lot of the points that I had written down on there have been made by some of our incredible speakers before that. So I'll try to stress just a few things. You mentioned, Caroline, the diversity and the variety of civil society stakeholders and right holders. And I think this is absolutely key. The incredible diversity of this civil society reflects also the diversity and the breadth of the impact of what plastic pollution is. We've heard from other speakers how we've moved from the past year from an issue of plastic waste in the ocean, microplastic, to a whole life cycle approach. I think in this context, it's useful to go back to some of the definition of what plastic pollution is. There are many definitions of what plastic pollution is. One that I like best is one that was developed by a landmark report by OECD and that was taken over also by the BRS Secretariat recently to identify what are we talking about when we're talking about plastic pollution. And what we're really talking about is all emission and risks that arise from the production, use, disposal, and leakage of plastic in the environment. And that helps us to understand, again, the variety of communities, people, citizens that are being impacted at every single stage of the life cycle of plastic. And everywhere we look for plastic, we find it, whether in the environment, in our bodies, or literally everywhere we look, we find it. We also identified that there are very clear impacts on health. And I was reminded by Rolf, it's not just the microplastic, but all the chemicals that get into the plastic that have a massive impact on our health. Human rights, as we've heard, are being impacted at every single stage of the life cycle of plastic, and not just one human rights, but the variety of rights, of essential rights that have been recognized by the entire global community around plastic, and that this is a key element. The civil society in its diversity and breadth also represents not only the voices that, as we've heard before, not only have a right to be represented, but are also essential to provide actual solutions to the crisis that we're having. Too often in the environmental community, we've tried or we end up moving one problem to the next, or we end up pushing the problem and having the most impoverished or disenfranchised community bear the cost of what we believe are solutions. And I think, again, the diversity of the plastic society helps us understand the diversity and all the impacts that exist around the life cycle of plastic. I'll finish. I understand that I'm the last one standing between you and the reception, almost, in the final panel at least. But I'll finish by saying one thing. From very early on, civil society has been at the forefront in raising those issues. The reason we're talking about health today, the reason we're talking about life cycle impacts, the reason we're talking about human rights impact, the reason we're talking about just transition in the plastic life cycle is because those issues have been raised by civil society over the past decades. And I remember some of the points that were made on the panel today, I've been making them 8 years ago and felt like preaching in the desert. Obviously, I wasn't, and this is it feels very encouraging and very reassuring to see such distinguished delegates pick up on those points and recognize the impact of what it actually is. So we've been there from the very beginning, raising the issue and being the conscious of the process that is going on. You can count on us to continue to provide the expertise from on the ground and from experts from all around the world, and to continue to raise the issue and hold the whole world, including ourselves, accountable to how we will meet the challenges that was given to us by UNEA to end plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Abdellah Boutadghafre, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Morocco to the United Nations office here in Geneva. And as many of you know, the next UN Environment Assembly will be under the presidency of Morocco. So it's a great privilege to invite you to the floor. Please.
Merci, Madame la modératrice. C'est un plaisir et une joie de partager avec vous cette célébration de la Journée internationale de l'environnement. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier les co-sponsors pour cette invitation et aussi pour l'organisation de cet important événement. And if you allow me, I want to shift to English and to say how it's hard to be the last one to take the floor when all was said. I heard with attention and carefully all the presentation made earlier, and for sure we are facing a very scaring and warning situation, calling for an urgent mobilization at all level, at national and international community has given itself until the end of 2024 to reach the long-awaited legally binding global treaty to end plastic pollution. And I hope that next year we will be able to celebrate this outcome. So we welcome the progress of the work of the Anti-Governmental Negotiating Committee and the outstanding outcome reached last week in Paris to prepare the first draft text to be presented and discussed during the next session in November 2023. This is actually a huge step forward. The commitment of Morocco to this process is twofold. As chair of the 6th session of UNEA and as a delegation that has always put environmental challenges in the top priority. Indeed, Morocco is in a capacity as president of the 6th UNEA is committed to make every effort to achieve the objectives of Resolution 5/14, aiming to establish a legally binding international instrument on plastic pollution, in particular in the marine environment by 2024. A report of the progress made by the ANC process will be made by the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, Mr. Egnar Anderson, in the next session. Morocco will spare no effort to support the process and to ensure its success. I would like to seize this opportunity to stress the Moroccan national engagement to this ANC process. Morocco is pleading for the protection of human health and environmental from the impacts associated with plastics and to restrain plastic consumption and production to sustainable levels, among many other objectives. And to deal with this scourge of plastic pollution, Morocco has taken the necessary measure to reduce the consumption of plastic, promote its recycling, and manage plastic waste. In this regard, the legal framework has been reinforced by a set of relevant legislation, in particular by the promulgation of the Law 77/15 related to the prohibition of the manufacture, import, export, marketing, and the use of plastic bags. Morocco also believes on the promotion and enhancement of cooperation and coordination between countries as well as with the international NGOs to effectively implement the instruments measures. I want to go back to the dialogue regarding the policy in plastic in the framework of WTO. As you see, my colleague from Ecuador has already presented this initiative with eloquence. And I just want to stress the different discussion we had since the launch of this dialogue showed how important the role of trade policy, and WTO are in contributing to national and international efforts to tackle plastic pollution. In the dialogue with the other coordinator, we are thinking how to advance for a holistic approach that includes the plastic trade dimension as part of the solution for the ANC process and to promote a circular economy favorable to respect climate, environmental and health safety, and we are working now on the potential outcome for the next ministerial declaration. For sure, the phenomenon of the plastic pollution is global, and only by joining all efforts and in anticipating cooperation in all fields and between all members and different actors, we could effectively tackle it. Finally, I would like to underline the commitment of my country to continue engaging constructively in all international efforts to end to policing plastic. Thank you for kind attention.
Merci beaucoup, and thank you also to Morocco and to your ambassador for their leadership on the global environmental agenda, both in the multilateral system widely and especially here in Geneva. Thank you very much for being with us. So I'm now here to the final closing panel, but before we do that, just a quick round of applause for all of those who've been on this far. I hope you all agree that it's inspiring to see all that we have here in International Geneva, all of the resources, the leadership, the commitment, the brain power that we have, and also that many of the people we see here are connected to far broader international networks of actors, and that we have so many passionate governments here. And with that, I wish to turn the floor now to Martine Ron, who is the Deputy Head of the International Affairs Division at the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. Switzerland, of course, is our host state here and is supporter of the Geneva Environment Network's dialogues, and also a great supporter of international action on plastic pollution. So it's my pleasure to hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous, Monsieur le maire, Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, c'est vraiment un plaisir pour moi de représenter aujourd'hui l'Office fédéral de l'environnement et la Confédération suisse. I would like to thank all our panelists for the very valuable and important contribution. Now I just would like to make a small exercise with you. We also celebrate today the 15th day, World Day of the Environment. Who was on the planet 50 years ago? No, oh, there are still very young people in the room. Very good. So myself, I was already born and I was in the first class. And I asked my mother, yesterday I asked her, do you remember this day of the environment? And she told me, yes, I think I can remember. You have been in the first class and you have to collect, to gather aluminium from the chocolate. Do you remember in the chocolate bar you had aluminium? And at that time it was to collect because it is metals, minerals, etc. And since then I have a big heart for the environment. And I'm very proud that I've been nominated by UNEP to co-chair with Pakistan a process regarding mineral and metals governance issue. And I remember that time as we gather from the chocolate bars aluminium, and now I think I gather from the chocolate bars plastic. Or so, is that correct? So the journey is very long. We are going from one materials to another, etc. It's not finished. Good. So today we heard very negative impacts actually of the plastic on the environment, but also on health. But we also heard about encouraging messages that the global community is actually mobilized to tackle this challenge. And what I also heard, actually we know that we can do something. We know how to tackle this issue. It's not a very new subject, so it's interesting to hear about that. Switzerland, as you mentioned it, we are very active in this process. We are a member of the High Ambition Coalition, and we advocate for a robust treaty with global binding rules. We think to have a convention based on national action plans or on voluntary initiatives, it's good, but it will not be sufficient and will not bring the transformative shift towards a circular economy that we actually need. We witness substantive acceleration, for example, of primary plastic production. Globally, with over more than 40%, what I heard of the products are destined for single use. It's really incredible. And really this treaty should tackle this issue as well, that we should reduce the total volume of virgin plastic produced. To achieve the objective to end plastic pollution, we need the commitment of all relevant actors. And today we can witness all these partners present here from all different international organizations in different sectors. And I can mention, yes, UNEP Chemical and Health Branch, BRS, SAICM, the WTO, WHO, the ILO, the Human Rights Council. We also heard World Business Council and all the actors of the civil society, also from the academia. It's very nice to have many of these actors are present today, and listening to all of you is show us that you are mobilized and you are also ready to work together. I heard, I think last week in Paris, there have been 900 observers on in the whole meetings. It's really incredible. We really have to work together on this issue. And those who work hard deserve to be rewarded. And it is the reason why it is really a pleasure for the Swiss Confederation, together with the city and canton of Geneva, to host the aperitifs that we will have just afterwards. But before, we have the mayor of the city of Geneva. But I give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Martine, and thank you for joining us. So our last speaker is Alfonso Gomez, the mayor of the city of Geneva. C'est un grand plaisir de vous accueillir.
Merci, mesdames et messieurs. Permettez-moi de faire ce petit discours en français. En ma qualité de maire de la ville, je suis évidemment extrêmement heureux de pouvoir vous adresser ces quelques mots à l'occasion de cette réception offerte par les autorités fédérales, cantonales et communales pour cette journée mondiale de l'environnement. Et surtout pour fêter, si je peux le dire ainsi, l'issue du dialogue de haut niveau qui est consacré à la pollution plastique. Et comme vous l'avez certainement évoqué pendant cette réunion, 430 millions de tonnes sont produites chaque année dans le monde. Et le plastique, aujourd'hui, est devenu l'un des principaux facteurs de la pollution planétaire. Nous le voyons depuis plusieurs décennies. Moi, je me souviens, dans les années 90, j'ai commencé mes missions au CICR. Je me trouvais à ce moment-là à Omdurman, à côté de Khartoum, au Soudan, le tragique Soudan. Et j'ai vu au loin des lumières belles. Je me suis dirigé vers ces lumières. Et en fait, j'étais tout proche du cimetière d'Omdurman. Et c'était le plastique qui venait du désert et qui s'accrochait sur les tombes. Et déjà là, j'étais frappé. Et puis de décennies, tous les jours, quand j'ai l'occasion, je suis galicien, j'habitais au bord de mer et j'habite quand je vais voir la famille au bord de mer et je me promène tous les jours. Tous les jours, je vais avec mon épouse et nous prenons un sac en plastique. Et tous les jours, nous remplissons ce sac en plastique. Et ce que nous constatons, c'est que de plus en plus tôt, nous remplissons ce sac. Il y a de plus en plus, effectivement, de cette pollution plastique. Et cela touche évidemment les gens. Et ça commence aujourd'hui à avoir une mobilisation. Et la mobilisation que vous menez aujourd'hui, évidemment, cette conférence est extrêmement importante. Et les villes sont particulièrement concernées par cette problématique, à la fois en tant que responsables, puisque nous avons de plus en plus d'habitants, de gens qui habitent dans les villes. Je me souviens aussi, il y a une dizaine d'années, la première motion au sein du conseil municipal que j'ai eu l'honneur de présenter. J'étais à ce moment-là conseiller municipal pour interdire justement le plastique dans nos villes. Donc nous sommes d'un côté les responsables de cette production, bien entendu, et puis nous sommes aussi responsables de la gestion, en quelque sorte, de cette pollution, et notamment, comme je viens de l'indiquer, à travers la prévention, à travers la collecte, bien entendu, de ces déchets, à travers le recyclage et la préservation de l'environnement. Cela, c'est extrêmement important et c'est très important pour nous en ville de Genève. Donc, nous travaillons sur la question de la pollution plastique depuis plusieurs années dans le cadre de notre engagement global en matière de développement durable et plus particulièrement récemment avec la stratégie climat que la ville de Genève a élaborée et qui vise, entre autres, à la diminution de 60%, évidemment, des gaz à effet de serre sur notre territoire, et cela d'ici à 2030, et la neutralité carbone que nous souhaitons atteindre en 2050. Depuis 2020, la ville interdit ainsi les objets plastiques à usage unique, là où évidemment nous avons la compétence légale pour l'imposer, c'est-à-dire toutes les grandes manifestations organisées par la ville de Genève, les buvettes qui sont situées sur l'espace, dans le domaine de l'espace public et qui sont soumis à autorisation, ou encore au sein de notre administration. Et puis parallèlement à ça, la ville de Genève met en œuvre plusieurs projets et actions, non seulement de sensibilisation afin de promouvoir l'économie circulaire, qui est extrêmement importante, mais surtout de réduire l'impact environnemental et social de la consommation. Parce que, mesdames et messieurs, réduire la production est fondamental, et surtout dans une ville et dans un pays comme le nôtre, car la grande majorité des objets concernés sont des objets de courte durée de vie, voire des objets à usage unique. Et puis, nous, ville de Genève, canton de Genève, mais la Suisse en général, nous avons un rôle extrêmement important. Pourquoi? Parce que la production de déchets plastiques, mesdames et messieurs, elle est liée au pouvoir d'achat, à notre propre richesse. Et la Suisse produit 90 kilos de déchets plastiques chaque année par personne. Et évidemment, cela a un lien avec la richesse que nous avons et notre niveau de consommation. Donc, nos objectifs, ce n'est pas seulement de mieux jeter, si vous me permettez l'expression, mais plutôt de recycler, mais aussi de travailler en amont sur la question de consommation responsable et donc la production de déchets à sa source, avec l'idée centrale que le meilleur déchet, évidemment, est celui qui n'est pas produit. Aujourd'hui, face à cet immense défi que représente la lutte contre la pollution plastique, je voudrais en tout cas saluer l'engagement de la Genève internationale sur cette thématique et rappeler le rôle de premier plan qu'elle peut jouer dans la résolution de cette crise. Ce centre multilatéral d'importance et évidemment cette Genève internationale compte un fabuleux réseau d'expertise et de décision, et notamment celui qui est composé d'organisations intergouvernementales, de missions gouvernementales permanentes, mais aussi des organisations non gouvernementales, d'institutions académiques, et dans notre ville, et cela est très important pour nous, de nombreuses associations qui sont très actives dans le domaine. Alors que se négocie actuellement le traité mondial contre la pollution plastique, que l'on peut considérer comme un des textes contraignants parmi les plus importants pour notre planète depuis de nombreuses années, je ne doute pas que l'apport décisif de la Genève internationale dans les discussions en cours sera primordial. Et dans le cadre de cette négociation, je voudrais également, si vous me le permettez, appeler les gouvernements nationaux à consulter leurs collectivités locales et leurs collectivités régionales, afin que l'on puisse s'assurer que ce traité va bien refléter de manière adéquate les préoccupations, évidemment, des villes, et qu'il pourra être mis en œuvre de manière réaliste. C'est un des objectifs également de mon année de mairie, c'est de réunir les maires des grandes villes, en tout cas européennes, un certain nombre d'entre eux, pour voir exactement quelles sont les mesures qui aujourd'hui sont prises. Nous avons pris toute une série de résolutions depuis de nombreuses années. Aujourd'hui, il ne s'agit pas seulement de prendre ces résolutions, mais de savoir concrètement quels sont les pas que nous avons faits. Nous ne pouvons pas attendre 2029 pour constater que nous n'allons pas atteindre les objectifs de 2030. C'est aujourd'hui déjà que nous devons dire concrètement ce que nous avons fait et quels sont les progrès en la matière. Il s'agit donc d'une revendication pour moi importante et qui est portée également par le Geneva City Hub, qui a été créé en 2020 par la ville de Genève et le canton de Genève, avec le soutien de la Confédération suisse, de renforcer le rôle des villes, de renforcer le pouvoir en quelque sorte des gouvernements locaux et régionaux en la matière, et surtout de pouvoir participer dans ces discussions internationales qui ont eu lieu ici à Genève pour pouvoir montrer et démontrer ce que nous faisons concrètement et que cette lutte est évidemment possible d'être menée avec les objectifs ambitieux que nous nous sommes fixés pour 2030. Le Geneva City Hub a ainsi appelé récemment à l'inclusion de représentants municipaux dans les travaux du comité intergouvernemental de négociation, ainsi que l'inscription d'une référence dans le texte au rôle joué par ces gouvernements locaux, par les villes, dans la prévention et dans la lutte contre la pollution plastique. Pour moi, j'espère que ces revendications importantes seront entendues. Elle est primordiale puisque les villes, les communes, les gouvernements régionaux sont la première étape entre la citoyenneté, évidemment, qui est indispensable dans cette mobilisation que nous devons aujourd'hui plus que jamais renforcer. Voilà, je vous remercie en tout cas pour ces débats et surtout pour votre attention. Bonne suite.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire. And also, I think we would all agree it's a very inspiring close for us because we have heard, I think, loud and clear from you the importance of looking for where the action is already happening and driving that meanwhile. And of course, cities have a key role to play. I think Mustafa Kamal also highlighted the important role that communities and workers have as agents of change in this transformation. And also David, in his remarks, highlighted the importance of civil society. So I think here what we have is an effort to not only drive action at the multilateral level, but to make sure that it is informed by the work and the knowledge that people have in their communities and in their cities in how to drive change as well. So a really great way for us to close. I'm going to turn back to Arnold Kreithuber to take us now to the reception. But I just wanted to say from the point of view of the moderator, how inspiring this has been in a conversation to see that we have a willingness to lead from the top and also a willingness to listen to those who can be agents of change from around the world as well. So thank you all very much for your time, and over to Arnold.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and huge compliments for moderating this excellent channel so expertly and for trying to keep the time. There was clearly a lot to talk about. Martin, Monsieur le Maire, thank you very, very much for all the support that you're providing in terms of hosting us all here in Geneva, all that Switzerland does at the international level in terms of support of these processes, and also, of course, to the Geneva Environment Network, which provides the umbrella for many of these debates. The doors to the reception are already open, so I want to be very brief, but I thought I almost have to highlight how vibrant this discussion today was and how well it shows what an environmental hub Geneva is, and how we must continue these dialogues all together to help, as I also said at the beginning, to find these solutions, to find innovations, to help us really turn off the tap on plastic pollution, to quote again this recent UNEP report. A big thanks to all the speakers again who made time to be with us today, to Diana and the team from the Geneva Environment Network for working tirelessly behind the scenes and working on the details, logistics, and the program, and to all of you for coming and enjoying World Environment Day 2023 with us. And with this, let's continue these debates during the reception that also Switzerland has gracefully organized for us. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Caroline.